Jackson stared numbly at the piece of paper in his trembling hand, the reality around him growing distant and surreal. $840, Kate repeated from behind the counter, her tone dispassionate, as though she'd delivered this unbearable news 100 times before. That's just for a single month's supply. His throat tightened painfully, choking the words before they could form. This wasn't possible. Couldn't be real. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping it was a mistake. But when they reopened, the cold reality of the numbers stared back defiantly. A wave of nausea surged inside him. His mother had once bought this same insulin, quietly, almost apologetically, counting out quarters and dimes on the cracked kitchen table. He'd witnessed that countless times, too young then to grasp the humiliation, but old enough now to drown in it. "Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" His voice emerged thin and cracked, betraying a desperation he had never felt before. Kate remained unmoved, a silent resignation in her eyes. "No mistake, sir. Your insurance rejected coverage, and that's before the processing fees, distribution surcharges, and management markups." Jackson froze, his mind blank, heart hammering against his chest. Jackson Miller, CEO of Fairmed Pharmaceuticals, stood trapped within the same system he believed he controlled. The irony was bitter, a slap in the face that shattered his self-assurance. He'd always thought he knew the ins and outs, the numbers, the graphs. He thought he understood the real price of medicine, yet here he stood, powerless and vulnerable, facing the brutal truth he had overlooked. It wasn't just him. Everyone else was paying this price too, every day, in pharmacies across America. His mother's memory flooded back with painful clarity. He could almost feel the chill of that tiny kitchen, see her tired smile as she prepared her morning insulin shot. Her hands had always trembled, not from the needle, but from a deeper fear, a hidden anxiety he'd only later come to understand. She'd worked night shifts, pushing her body to exhaustion, just to keep that tiny vial filled. When money was tight, and it was always tight, she'd quietly cut her doses, rationing insulin as though it were gold. He vividly recalled the night she collapsed. He'd carried her frail body to the battered family truck, his small arms straining, fear and confusion gripping him. He'd vowed then, with a child's fierce sincerity, that no one would ever have to choose between medicine and food again. He built Fairmed on that promise, a promise he now saw was painfully hollow. One bitterly cold winter night stuck in his mind more sharply than the others. His mother had sat hunched over the table under the dim glow of the flickering kitchen bulb, gripping an almost empty insulin vial. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she measured out half a dose, not because the doctor recommended it, but because half was all that remained. Jackson had watched silently from the doorway, a tightness building in his chest, knowing something was terribly wrong, yet unable to express it. She'd smiled at him, forcing warmth into her voice. "Don't worry, Jack. Mommy's fine." But she wasn't fine. He had seen the tears she hurriedly wiped away, and he'd heard her stomach groan in protest when she pretended not to be hungry. Jackson carried the haunting echoes of that night with him, promising himself he'd never forget the feeling of helplessness, the weight of silent shame. He had spent years in sleek boardrooms, confident he understood the struggle because he'd seen it firsthand. But standing here, clutching an obscene receipt, he finally grasped how disconnected he had become. Numbers were cold, devoid of humanity. Numbers never felt hunger. Numbers never cried in quiet desperation. People did, and he'd forgotten that along the way. 2 months earlier, when the disturbing report first crossed his desk, he dismissed it as something distant, outside his realm of influence. Insulin prices spiked nationwide, people rationed their doses, some even died. But Fairmed hadn't raised prices. They'd been stable, responsible, ethical. His team pointed fingers at distributors, insurance companies, and convoluted supply chains, offering plausible yet unsatisfying answers. But as Jackson pored over the data in lonely hours late at night, one piercing question haunted him relentlessly. Who's quietly profiting from this pain? He knew instinctively that he wouldn't find the answer in sanitized reports or polished presentations. To understand the true depth of this corruption, he had to experience it himself. In a moment of profound resolve, he discarded his polished image, abandoned the security of his title, and stepped anonymously into the system he'd once believed he controlled. No entourage, no media, no PR team, just Jackson, alone and vulnerable, confronting the grim reality he had long ignored. This journey wasn't about salvaging Fairmed's image or market share. It was about something deeper, something profoundly personal. If the system was broken, he was a part of it, and that realization pierced his heart more deeply than any needle ever could. Jackson woke that morning with a determination so fierce it was almost foreign. This wasn't just another day at the office. He was stepping away from his polished, predictable world and into the shoes of those he had long overlooked. He stood before the mirror, staring intently at the stranger reflected back. Gone was the tailored suit, replaced with an old gray hoodie, faded jeans, and worn sneakers. Clothing not belonging to Jackson Miller, CEO, but to Jack, a man who belonged in the everyday struggle he had once lived and yet had somehow forgotten. A moment of hesitation flickered across his eyes. The reflection was uncomfortable, even jarring, like facing a past he'd buried deep beneath layers of corporate ambition. Pulling the cap low over his brow, he felt anonymous, stripped of power, title, and privilege. For the first time in years, he looked like everyone else. The people he'd been failing, the ones he'd once sworn to protect. Gathering the prescription slip, he stepped out into the sunlight, breathing deeply, tasting anxiety mixed with resolve. Entering Green Cross Pharmacy was a stark reminder of the world he had constructed yet never truly understood. Clean aisles and bright lights masked a chilling atmosphere, the sterile air punctuated by quiet despair. People sat scattered, heads bowed, eyes glued to their phones, as if avoiding eye contact might somehow lessen the burden they carried. He joined the line, his heart quickening. A screen overhead flashed discounts on everything but insulin, the one medication that should have been readily affordable. The silence around him spoke louder than any conversation could have. It wasn't apathy he saw on these faces, it was defeat. Finally, his turn came. Kate, the pharmacist, moved mechanically, indifferent to the lives she touched every day. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Jack Miller," he replied quietly, feeling the weight of his assumed identity deepen. Seconds dragged by until Kate finally looked up, her face emotionless. "One bottle, standard insulin." "That's $840, she announced, her tone casual, almost dismissive, like stating the weather or the time. The shock was immediate, visceral, his chest tightening painfully. "Wait, what? Is that with insurance?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. She repeated, calm and unbothered. "Insurance declined. Standard out-of-pocket rates apply." Jackson felt a swell of frustration and panic rise from his gut. His hands trembled slightly as he struggled to understand the outrageous figure. How had he not seen this? How had he allowed himself to become so blind? "Could you explain that price, please?" He forced the words out, voice cracking with tension. Kate recited the details robotically. $200 for processing, $100 distribution surcharge, another $100 management add-on, plus retail markup. Each word was delivered without feeling, as though empathy had been trained out of her by endless repetition. "This isn't medicine. This is extortion," Jackson muttered bitterly, feeling the anger burn in his throat. Kate didn't flinch, didn't argue. She simply waited, her eyes empty, mirroring the apathy he sensed around him. Jackson glanced desperately at the people waiting. None reacted. None seemed surprised. It was as if they'd all silently accepted their fate long ago. He discreetly activated the recorder hidden in his watch, capturing Kate's cold explanations. He wanted evidence, proof of a system he had unwittingly helped create. "Are these fees optional?" he asked softly, a quiet plea hidden beneath his words. Kate shook her head slightly. "No, sir, they're all standard." That word, standard, echoed bitterly, mocking his previous assumptions about fairness and transparency. Jackson requested a full breakdown, listening carefully, each fee stabbing deeper into his conscience. Behind him, a soft noise drew his attention. A worn-out man at the next counter, visibly shaken. A Vietnam veteran, a work badge pinned proudly yet sadly to his jacket. He fumbled with his cards, each decline feeling like a physical blow. Jackson watched helplessly, guilt clawing at him, knowing his own hands had been complicit. Another customer stepped up, Linda, thin, pale, visibly ill. Her trembling voice pleaded, "I can't afford the full prescription, just enough for 1 week." Her quiet desperation filled the room, yet the pharmacist barely reacted, typing impassively. Jackson's heart twisted, watching her count crumpled bills as though her life depended on those scraps of paper. Because it did. The silence was deafening, heavy with unspoken anguish. Jackson stood there, questions roaring through his mind, battling guilt and disbelief. How had he become blind to this? How had the system become so broken, so indifferent? "Break it down, every charge," he managed to say, his voice tight with controlled anger. Kate continued her mechanical recitation, each fee sounding more absurd, more immoral. Base medication price $470, processing fee $200 for handling and documentation. Distribution surcharge $100 for refrigerated transport and warehousing. Jackson clutched the counter, a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm him as the bitter truth unfolded. A truth he had to face, acknowledge, and ultimately challenge. Jackson's lungs tightened painfully as Kate's voice continued, relentlessly calm, detailing each charge. "Management add-on, $70, she recited, her tone unchanging, almost mechanical. "That covers corporate administrative overhead. Retail markup, 3% applied after base fees." His gaze fell to the total again, clear, precise, unmistakable. This wasn't human error. This was calculated precision, a flawless, heartless formula. Kate stared expectantly, indifferent, waiting for payment. Jackson's mind scrambled for words that never came. His throat felt closed off, choking him from within. He pulled his wallet from his pocket with trembling hands, counting bills onto the cold countertop. 500, 600, 700. His fingers shook uncontrollably, revealing his desperation openly. $820. His voice emerged weakly, betraying his vulnerability. "Is that enough?" Without even a glance down, Kate responded flatly, "You're $20 short." His heart plunged, the blood draining from his face, leaving him cold and hollow. Jackson had deliberately left all his cards behind to truly experience being just another ordinary person. Now he was precisely that. A powerless man short on cash, overlooked and ignored. He searched the room desperately for compassion, empathy, understanding, but met only blank faces, locked in their own quiet struggles. Slowly, shame burning his cheeks, Jackson gathered the scattered bills, feeling the weight of defeat heavier than he ever had as CEO. His thoughts spiraled in humiliation. Behind him, another name was called softly, Rosa Hernandez. Jackson turned instinctively to see a frail, elderly woman moving forward, her small frame wrapped in layers as if shielding herself from the harsh reality. She carefully handed over her prescription, her trembling hands reflecting the fragility of hope. The pharmacist murmured something Jackson couldn't hear clearly, but Rosa's reaction told him everything. Her eyes widened in shock, a heartbreaking vulnerability flashing across her face as she whispered, "I can't." Clutching her worn purse like it held her very life, she turned quietly and left without protest, defeated, unnoticed. Jackson's chest ached deeply, as something shattered within him. A quiet fury ignited inside Jackson, an anger he had never known before. This wasn't frustration. It was righteous, bitter rage. They weren't simply numbers, fees, or policies. They were lives silently extinguished by prices with quiet cruelty. Rosa, Linda, Bill, faces etched in agony and resignation. His own heart pounded violently with guilt, realizing his silent complicity. He stared fiercely at Kate, the sterile shelves behind her, the lifeless system he had unknowingly perpetuated. His voice came firm, controlled, demanding justice. "I want to speak to your manager." Kate's indifferent mask held steady. "He's off-site," she replied mechanically. Jackson pressed further, his voice icy and unyielding. "Then call him." Her refusal came instantly, like clockwork. "I can't do that." His jaw tightened painfully, frustration sharpening into clarity. "Can't or won't." The heavy silence was her only answer. Jackson felt a growing storm within himself, yet his voice remained carefully controlled, dangerously quiet. "I want answers. From someone who knows what's truly happening." Kate's cold reply stung deeper than intended. "You can call customer service." This dismissal sparked something primal in him. Reaching deliberately into his pocket, he withdrew his hidden card, the sleek, black corporate ID that granted unquestionable authority. As he placed it on the counter, Kate's mask finally broke. Her eyes widened with sudden recognition and fear. Jackson Miller, CEO, Fairmed Pharmaceuticals. Jackson leaned closer, speaking slowly, forcefully. "Call your manager. Now." Within moments, Carter, the store manager, hurried over, mid-50s, exhaustion marking his every step. His nervousness radiated visibly as he glanced between Kate, Jackson, and the powerful symbol of authority on the counter. Carter's voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Miller, I wasn't informed you'd be visiting." Jackson remained silent, letting the tension deepen. Carter's discomfort intensified under the heavy silence. "Explain the charges," Jackson finally said, his tone dangerously calm, demanding accountability. Carter hesitated, voice uncertain, fumbling. "These fees are standard: distribution, handling, overhead." His voice stumbled, betraying unease, unlike Kate's practiced detachment. Jackson leaned in, the weight of responsibility pressing him harder. "Who sets them?" Carter's discomfort deepened. His words came out rushed, anxious, spilling truth quickly. "Head office controls fees. We're instructed to follow guidelines." Jackson interrupted sharply. "Does Fairmed approve these fees?" Carter's silence hung heavy, his eyes revealing the truth he couldn't speak. Jackson's heart sank further, realizing the depths of his own ignorance. "The fees," Carter confessed softly, shame evident, "are set by Green Cross, labeled as optimization, pricing strategies. Patients without insurance, they're seen as revenue opportunities." Jackson's stomach churned painfully, hearing patients reduced to mere opportunities. He pressed further, quiet but demanding. "Who approved this?" Carter hesitated, guilt-stricken silence answering louder than words. Then, the painful realization flooded Jackson. Fairmed's deal with Green Cross, signed by him years ago to streamline supply chains and market reach. It had seemed logical then, efficient, but he had unknowingly given power to those who viewed patients merely as profit margins. The crushing reality hit Jackson like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a corrupt system or ruthless distributors. It was his signature on the papers, his trust betrayed, his oversight. He had built this heartless machinery, believing he was protecting people like his mother. Instead, he'd betrayed their trust, allowed greed to infiltrate medicine, and reduced lives to transactions. Faces haunted him. Rosa walking away empty-handed, Linda pleading for mere days of survival, Bill's repeated swipes of rejected cards. Jackson felt a sickness inside, twisting his gut, tightening his chest. His body trembled with grief, guilt, shame. But he knew the bitter truth. The past couldn't be fixed by guilt alone. In that agonizing moment, clarity pierced through. His choices had built this ruthless system, and now only his choices could dismantle it. I sat in the boardroom alone. No advisors, no charts, just silence. The long conference table stretched before me like a relic of all the power meetings once held here. Each chair was empty, yet filled with memories, of analysts crunching numbers, executives pitching growth, voices layered with ambition. But today, only echoes remained. The Fairmed logo stared down from the wall, gleaming and polished, yet devoid of meaning now. I pressed my palms against the table, my head bowed low. The room, once a throne of control, now felt like a confession booth. Rosa's eyes haunted me, Linda's trembling hands, Bill's silent retreat. Their stories looped in my mind, lessons carved deeper than any boardroom report ever had. I used to believe Fairmed saved lives, but now I couldn't even define what we did anymore. With all the wealth, influence, and connections at my fingertips, I had no defense left. And then, from the quiet of memory, came a voice. My mother's. I was 17 again, watching her at our tiny kitchen table, struggling to inject her insulin. She caught me staring, smiled weakly, and whispered something I hadn't remembered in years. Insulin isn't meant to be sold, Jack. It's meant to be shared. Back then, I thought she was talking about charity. But today, I understood. She spoke of dignity, of equity, of moral obligation. Medicine isn't a commodity. It's a covenant, a promise between humanity and hope. And I had broken that promise. That moment, I made the call. Not to lawyers or PR teams, but directly to operations. We're cutting Green Cross out, I said. The silence on the line was thick, followed by stunned questions. I didn't entertain them. No third parties, no price markups, no excuses. We're launching Fair Price Health, effective immediately. This wasn't a pitch. It was a reckoning. Fair Price Health would be direct to patient, cost only, no intermediaries, no hidden charges. They warned me about the losses. We'd hemorrhage millions. I didn't blink. We'll save lives. That afternoon, I sent a company-wide directive. Short, resolute. Fairmed launches Fair Price Health, transparent pricing, direct delivery, no distribution chain. The inbox exploded. Executives panicked, investors fumed. I didn't read a single message. In the memo, I'd written one truth they couldn't ignore. We did not invent medicine to profit from pain. The reaction wasn't immediate, but then slowly it came. Small-town clinics reached out. Rural doctors, exhausted nurses, community health centers. They didn't want funding. They wanted fairness. They wanted hope. We started shipping. Not by pallets to warehouses, but small boxes to front doors, to living rooms, to people. Within 3 weeks, the price of a single insulin bottle dropped from $840 to $30. The same formula, the same dosage. But this time, without the profit-hungry filters. Headlines came quickly. Journalists called it unprecedented. Analysts called it unsustainable. Patients called it salvation. But the number didn't lie. $30. That was all it ever needed to be. No processing fees, no markups. Just medicine. I watched our first shipment roll out, one modest box with one word on the label, Fair Price. There was no press conference, no ribbon cutting, just silence and a feeling I hadn't known in years, peace. Days later, I walked quietly into the same Green Cross pharmacy. Same aisles, same fluorescent lights. And then I saw her, Rosa. Same scarf, same weary posture. She clutched her prescription, eyes already resigned. Not anger, not desperation, just habit. She was there because hope was the only ritual she hadn't given up. She stood before the counter, expecting rejection, expecting to walk away again. I stepped forward, dressed as a store clerk this time, plain uniform, clipboard in hand. She barely noticed me until I stood beside her. Then, gently, I placed a box into her hands. One vial of insulin. She looked up, startled, skeptical. I met her eyes. It's yours, no charge. Her hands trembled. She clutched the box like it might disappear. It's real, I said. Please, take it. Tears fell, silent and steady. There were no words left between us, just humanity. She whispered, "Why?" I couldn't speak at first. My throat was tight. Rosa wasn't asking for kindness. She was asking for a reason to believe. I finally said, "Because someone should have done this a long time ago." She nodded slowly. A silent acceptance that maybe, just maybe, something had changed. She held the insulin close to her chest and turned toward the exit. At the door, she looked back and smiled. Small, real. It was the first time I saw that smile, and in that moment, I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like someone's son, maybe my mother's. Back at Fairmed, I passed the boardroom without stopping. I didn't need that space anymore. In my office, I sat quietly. No spreadsheets, no strategy, just stillness. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not broadly, just enough to feel it was real. 1 week later, the announcement was public. Simple, definitive. Fairmed's insulin. Nationwide at cost. $30. No loopholes, no contracts, just medicine. People didn't believe it. Reporters questioned it. But it was true. That bottle, once $840, was now $30 for everyone. Fairmed wasn't a corporation now. It was a declaration, a stand, a turning point. And the message was clear. Medicine belongs to people, not profit. Some called it charity. They were wrong. This wasn't generosity. It was justice. We had pretended for too long that insulin was a luxury, that survival had to be earned. But it never was. It was stolen. I didn't lower the price for applause. I did it because it was the only right thing left to do. I didn't save anyone. I just gave them back what should have never been taken. The media swarmed. The headlines glowed. But I knew this was just the beginning. One drug, one promise kept. There are others still waiting, more doors unopened, more lives hanging by margins and markups. I don't know how long it will take before others follow, but maybe, just maybe, someone hearing this now will. If so, then what we did here isn't a conclusion. It's an invitation. A single, clear question. Is this the beginning?